When a new video game was released, one of the things the developers often boast about was the number of sales for that game, whether it's in the first week or month, what have you. But in recent years, it's kind of shifted to talking about how many people are playing the game on Game Pass to give the impression that it's a lot more successful than what it is. Because while many people, like myself included, have been pointing out just because people are playing a game on Game Pass doesn't necessarily mean the game is a financial success. It's often been met with criticism by people trying to defend the game and saying like, no, it's a success if it's being played a lot on Game Pass. But now we're starting to learn that no, that's actually true. Just because it's being played on Game Pass doesn't necessarily mean it's a financial success for the developer. And in fact, there's actual evidence to suggest that the more successful it is on Game Pass, the more detrimental it is to the developer of that game. But before we get into all that, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you can, leave a comment and hit the like button too, because it helps me out. Former Xbox VP admits Game Pass causes problems as media admits 3 million players is not 3 million sales. And I can't believe that has to be said at this point. I thought that should have been obvious, but I guess some people just hasn't grasped that yet. For years, gamers have debated whether subscription models like Xbox Game Pass are helping the industry or causing problems. Now, a former Xbox executive has admitted what critics have been saying all along. Game Pass is creating serious problems, both financially and creatively across the gaming world. In a new piece from PC Gamer, former Bethesda VP of Communications and Marketing Pete Hines revealed that Game Pass creates what he called weird intertensions, particularly when it comes to how the service values content and impacts game sales. And the reason this is a big factor in all this is because you have to look at the business model between this is talking about Game Pass specifically, but it could all apply to pretty much any subscription platform for playing video games. And the way it is for Game Pass, you have Microsoft not necessarily buying the game from the developer of it, because you have a third-party developer create a game. Now, normally, if they wanted to release it on a platform like Xbox, then obviously Microsoft will get a certain cut of the game sales in addition to getting the profit for the sales of the actual console. And then the developer of the game also gets a significant cut of the sales of the game at retail. Okay, so that makes sense. The way Game Pass works is the developer still does get a certain percentage of the downloads of that game, but it's significantly less than what they would get for a retail sale of the game. But they make up for that on the other end by the company itself paying to license it. So they'll give them a certain fee to license the game, and then they'll give them a small percentage of each download of that game. So it might sound like a good idea on the surface because you're getting some money up front, but let's say a game is a wild success and it has a lot more downloads than what people would have anticipated. Well, then suddenly you're finding the studio making significantly less on the game as if it was just sold through retail. Now, this is good for Microsoft because they're getting more subscriptions to their Game Pass, and all the downloads, it's really beneficial to them. But to the developer, not so much. And in fact, in some cases, we're finding that it's actually hurting the actual physical sales of the game or the digital downloads of the game, basically the retail aspect of the game, because people are choosing to play the game on Game Pass instead of actually buying a copy of the game, which is what these developers are counting on. If you don't figure out how to balance the needs of the service and the people running the service with the people who are providing the content, without which the subscription is worth jack-ish, then you have a real problem, he said. And that's really what it is. In the past, when you would have a developer produce a game, a company like Microsoft would distribute the game on Xbox. Everyone gets a cut of it. Everyone walks away happy. But instead, what you have is companies like Xbox, and I'm talking about them for the sake of this article because that's what it's focusing around. But like I said, this kind of applies to any subscription-based gaming service like this. You have the company who's distributing the game trying to find a way to make more money out of it, and ultimately is going to come at the cost of the people who are producing the content. Even if we're not even talking about third-party games, if you're talking about first-party games, they're still hiring outside developers who do count on that revenue from the retail sales of the game in order to stay open. And if things continue like this, they might find that it might not be sustainable for them. 3 million players does not equal 3 million sales. The most striking omission came when the article highlighted Tango Gameworks' Hi-Fi Rush, marketed as a breakout success with 3 million players on Game Pass. The studio behind it was nonetheless shuttered by Microsoft. PC Gamer then pointed out the obvious truth that many in the gaming community have stressed for years, a truth that maintained that the mainstream access game journalism has ignored until now. 3 million players isn't the same as 3 million sales. So you can see, even if a game is considered a success, if the company that produced the game isn't making nearly enough money because Game Pass cannibalized the retail sales of the game, well, then it's not going to be able to stay afloat for much longer. It's a crucial distinction, and one that publishers often blur when hyping up numbers. Player count on Game Pass makes for good headlines, but if retail sales are cannibalized, the studio may actually be worse off before. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now when it comes to this sort of thing. Backing up Heinz concerns, Shannon Loftus, former VP of Xbox Game Studios, added her own blunt assessment. Writing on LinkedIn, Loftus said, while Game Pass can claim a few victories, the majority of game adoptions on Game Pass comes at the expense of retail revenue unless the game is engineered from the ground up for post-release monetization. I could and may someday write pages on the weird intertensions this creates. So if a game is, let's say, a free-to-play game where you're not necessarily making the revenue on the sales of the game, but you're making the revenue on the back end either through microtransactions or add-ons or other things like that, well, then it could work. But if it's something like a single-player campaign game, then there's really no incentive to actually buy a retail copy of that game. In fact, that you're kind of incentivized not to, because you figure like, okay, I can power through this game in a week and maybe never touch it again, or even if I might want to play it again down the road, I have Game Pass, so there's no reason to actually buy a physical copy of it or buy a digital download of it. I'll just get it on Game Pass and just play it when I want to play it and be done with it. So for something like that, if you're not going to consistently be engaging with that game, then you probably shouldn't be buying a retail copy of it. Or in the versus in the past, if a person wanted to play a game when they didn't have a subscription service, they were forced to basically buy the copy of it. And while some people might say this is ultimately better for the consumer, when things like this continue, then it's just going to create an environment where a lot of developers are going to be like, well, the only games that we can actually make that are profitable for us as a company are basically these free to play games with a bunch of add-ons and microtransaction. And personally, I wouldn't like an environment where that's the only thing available, because that's the only thing that developers can produce, because that's what's profitable to them. Heinz and Loftus aren't alone in their warnings. Other industry veterans have been voicing similar criticism. Former PlayStation executive Sean Layden compared Game Pass like models to the way music streaming gutted value for creators, saying it's risking turning developers into wage slaves. Microsoft maintains that Game Pass is profitable overall, but profitability for Microsoft isn't the same thing as sustainability for developers. In fact, Microsoft CFO Tim Stewart has admitted that major titles like Starfield and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle lost millions in retail sales by being available day one on Game Pass. Now, just kind of changing focus a little bit to other industries, like take the movie industry, for instance. In the days back when the only other streaming platform was Netflix, the way Netflix worked, because it didn't produce content, it paid to license content from major studios, and then it would put it on its streaming platform. So the studios get some money by having it on their streaming platform, and then Netflix got their money through subscriptions. Okay, makes sense. Everyone's making money off of it. Everyone's happy. But just imagine if it came to a point where it's like a studio would actually pay to put it on a net, or you would get paid to put it on Netflix, and Netflix decided, like, you know, we're going to release it the same day it's released in theaters. We're going to release it on our streaming platform. I would think the movie studios would not really be that happy with it, because they're like, well, now you're kind of undercutting us, because people aren't watching movies in theaters. They're just watching it on Netflix, and we're losing out a lot. Like, yeah, we got paid up front, but we were kind of counting on that theatrical revenue in order to stay afloat. We can't maintain like this. So if that happened, it's a different example, because the studios would just cut Netflix out entirely and it would just kind of wither and die. That's not like the case anymore, though, because when you have companies like Microsoft having their own streaming service like this, and you also have to rely on Microsoft if you want to have your game on Xbox, well, then suddenly you're kind of finding yourself in a difficult position as a developer, because you're seeing like, okay, if I want to have it on Xbox, then that means I have to also have it on Game Pass. And if I have it on Game Pass, it's going to hurt the sales of the game. And ultimately, we as a company can't stay afloat unless we just produce games that are more or less making all their money through microtransactions and other add-ons. So instead, what I think is going to happen, unless companies like Microsoft and other game distributor changes course, what we're going to find is that a lot of studios are going to have to go independent and try to avoid a lot of these major companies and a lot of the major consoles, and maybe just release their games on Steam or some other digital platform where they can actually make money through retail, and try to cut out a lot of these major distributors like this, because ultimately, in an effort like Microsoft to try to make more profitability for themselves at the cost of the people who are producing their content, they're going to find that eventually it's going to be enough's enough. These developers can't sustain themselves by working with Microsoft, so they're just going to have to cut them out entirely. But I think that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. What's most likely going to happen is Microsoft is going to have to change how they do things and maybe give the developers of the games a bigger cut of the revenue through Game Pass. It's just a matter of how many other companies have to go under before they finally figure that out. But let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you can, leave a comment and share the video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.